Hello and welcome to this month's career series. Today we have with us Anoop Singh. Mr. Singh was the managing director and head of regulatory affairs for Asia Pacific at JP Morgan. He is currently on the adjunct faculties at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore and at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. At the IMF, he was director of the Western Hemisphere Department and later director of the Asia and Pacific Department. He holds degrees from the universities of Bombay, Cambridge, and the London School of Economics. He has held several other positions at the IMF, including Director of Special Operations in the Office of the Managing Director. His additional work experience includes Special Advisor to the Governor of the RBI and Senior Economic Advisor to the Vice President of the Asia region at the World Bank. Mr. Singh has worked and written on macroeconomic surveillance and crisis management issues, helping design IMF supported programs in emerging market, transition, and developing countries in South and Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. He led IMF missions to Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia during the Asian crisis, to Vietnam, Bulgaria, and Albania during their transition experiences, and to a number of other countries. Welcome, Mr. Singh. What would you say has been the biggest takeaway from your career so far?
Well, let me say just to tell you, I am now teaching in a university in Washington, so I'm very glad to speak to students here too. My own view is that the world is a highly connected environment, much more connected than it was when I started my career. And therefore, my advice to you is whatever you do, however you choose your career, you've got to act on the basis the world is highly connected. You need to fully absorb and know what's happening in your area of study or your area of job search, what's happening all over the world, and where are the world leaders in issues that you are involved in, and why is that the case. So I will go beyond India to know where the world is in the area of your speciality, your preference, your experience.
Mr. Singh, you have been a teacher, head of international organizations and companies, and a researcher. Was it challenging to take on these roles?
Well, I think what was more interesting for me was working with people from different countries, both government officials, corporates, private sectors, professors. That is almost more complicated to talk to people all over the world. In terms of my profession, I have functioned as an economist in many ways over the years, but I've been an economist, so I cannot claim to have done different things as much as I perhaps should have. But in the process, I worked on economics mainly from the IMF, but I've also done some time at the Reserve Bank of India. I worked as special advisor to two governors, I.G. Patel and briefly with Anoop Singh. I've also been posted in other parts of the world, and now I'm teaching in Washington. So my advice is whatever you're doing, it's very important to be highly connected both in your academic and study and also your work experience. And mobility nowadays is very important. I stayed for a long time at the IMF. I would say don't do that. Every 3-4 years, it's not a bad thing when you're young to change jobs. You get to know other experiences. The challenge is how do you work with different people on the same issue? That is complicated.
Mr. Singh, could you share a little bit about your experience at the IMF?
Well, I think in the IMF, what the IMF tries to do, like the World Bank and like the WTO, these are the 3-4 institutions that are trying to build up a governance framework on the economic and financial front globally. If you don't have international standards for economic behavior, countries do what they want and the world is worse off. So, what these institutions have tried to do is to build up standards for certain issues. The IMF looks at financial stability, they look at the way the international monetary system works. The World Bank, of course, tries to focus on poverty and developing countries. The WTO sets standards. How do you trade? Do you trade in an even and consistent way, or do you subsidize in a way that is not correct and not legal? So, whether it is financial, whether it is macro, whether it is development, poverty, trade, and now you have the Financial Stability Board on financial regulations. The reason for all these institutions is the world needs standards. If we don't have standards which are multilaterally accepted, it's not just that the world is not a good place, the world growth is not going to be as high as it should be. And that is why it's very important to look at issues from a global perspective and to set standards that are global. And by working the IMF, I've worked more on macro, economic, and financial issues, trying to prevent crises. We have failed quite often, trying to put countries together after they've had a crisis. How do you do that? If a country were to default, for example, Argentina, how does it then get put back together? And it's very difficult for one country. It's very difficult for like the US to tell the Philippines what to do. It's very difficult for the US to tell Argentina what to do. It is more acceptable if there is an international institution that tells a country, look, we are not the US. You may think we are, but we're not. We are an international institution, and it should be. And so we're telling you from a global perspective why what you're doing should change. And that's the focus of international institutions. I'm not saying you should all work on international institutions, but it's worth knowing that because the world is highly connected, you need to be connected also to the world.
And is there any advice you would like to give students looking to pursue a career like yours?
I don't think they should be economists. There are so many different choices in this world. The most important thing you have to do is, if you're not sure what you want to do, spend a weekend just thinking, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And work on that basis, recognizing for many students, where you think you want to be 5 years from now will change after 5 years, and be prepared for that. Life should be about change. Don't be afraid of change as long as you've thought it through. When you think it through and you want to change, do it in a very systematic way and try to reach global standards in what you do.
Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Singh. If you have any suggestions or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud.